$1,100,000. That's how much money we would need to have invested by 2030 in order to retire, and I'm on a mission to find the best way to hit that target. In this video, I'm gonna break down exactly how many Tesla shares it would take to do just that. Retire by 2030 and live off of a Tesla investment, slowly drawing it down over a 30-year period. Now, I know some other YouTubers have provided their take on how many Tesla shares it would take to retire, including Chicken Genius Singapore and some others, but I feel like they've missed a few key points, so I wanna give my take here. So without wasting any of your time, let's get right into it. Now, in order for me to break down how many Tesla shares it might take to retire by 2030, we first need to have a good idea of how much it's going to cost to retire. And that's what this chart is showing here with how I arrived at that $1,100,000 target to have invested in Tesla stock by 2030. Now, in terms of a super quick breakdown of how I got that figure, more or less by 2030, the average cost of living for a single household in the US, which is an average of 2.5 people per household, is probably gonna be around $81,600 per year. And this is accounting for inflation between today and 2030. So if we take that $81,600 figure and assume that we're going to be retired for approximately 30 years, now the average length of retirement in the US is only 18 years, but of course I think everybody wants to retire a little bit early and enjoy the fruits of their hard work. So let's assume that we're going to be retired for 30 years. That means we're going to need to have approximately $2.448 million to spend over the course of our retirement. Now, the beauty of compound interest, however, means that we don't actually have to have $2.4 million at the time that we retire because, of course, our investments are going to continue to appreciate over that 30-year period that we're retired. And to illustrate this, let's take a look at this simple retirement calculator. You can see that if we start with $1.1 million and assume that we're going to be retired for 30 years, taking out $6,800 per month, and this is that $81,600 per year figure, and then compound the interest annually at a rate of 7% in perpetuity. And that 7% perpetual growth rate is actually, I believe, a pretty conservative estimate because the inflation adjusted S&P 500 ROI historically has been around 8 to 8.2%. So even if we assume a slight uptick in long-term inflation, not short-term inflation, because we know there's crazy high inflation right now, but long-term inflation, if we assume that there's an increase, still putting a 7% perpetual growth rate is, I think, relatively conservative considering Tesla is still a growth stock and that the average inflation adjusted ROI for the entire S&P 500 is around 8%. And so this chart here is what retirement would look like. You slowly draw down on your Tesla investment over time, but of course it continues to appreciate, and then by the end of it, you would actually still have slightly less than $400,000 invested. And I'm actually gonna put a link to this spreadsheet in the description box of the video down below, so you can actually go and check it out for yourself. Anyways, now that we know how much money we need to have invested in Tesla by 2030, this is where the fun part starts because we can start working backwards from that to see how many shares we would need. And this table here lays out 4 possible scenarios for what Tesla could be worth by 2030. The bear case, the base case, the bull case, and the super bull case, which is extremely bullish and very interesting. And so depending on which growth scenario you think is most likely for Tesla over the next 8 years or so, that's going to dictate how many shares you think you might need to retire. Now, let's start with the bear case and work our way up. Now, just before I get started, I've listed down below here my sources for these valuation models in terms of what different people think Tesla could be worth in 2030. And the valuation model for the bear case is just assuming a pretty plebeian 7% per year growth between now and 2030. And then, of course, that perpetual 7% growth rate. And the reason why I'm using this for the bear model is that most big banks and investment firms don't actually set price targets beyond about 12 months in the future. Versus there are definitely some analysts and specific companies that are bullish on Tesla that set long-term price targets, but those don't tend to be super bearish. So here I'm trying to apply a pretty standard rate of growth, which is actually less than the average rate of growth for the S&P 500. So if we assume this, then the market cap of Tesla by 2030 would be just under $1.7 trillion. And that means that with a 2% per year issuance rate, which is another assumption that I've made here, but we have to essentially bake in the potential for Tesla to issue new shares, which increases the number of total shares outstanding and therefore decreases the relative value of each individual share. Anyways, if we assume a 2% per year issuance rate, then that means that the price per share in 2030 under the bear case model would be around $1,449. And at those prices, you would need 760 shares of Tesla invested in order to have that $1.1 million. Now, if you're going to purchase that many shares today, 759 shares, that would cost you approximately $700,000. Now, I know for a lot of retail investors, investing $700,000 today in Tesla is probably going to seem a little bit out of reach, but don't worry, because this is the bear case model, and as we go through the other scenarios, you're going to see the number of shares that you might need to retire on Tesla decrease significantly. So let's move now to the base case model. And the valuation model that I'm using for this is actually coming from Cathie Wood's ARK Invest. She's a legendary investor, and you've probably heard of her investment firm, ARK Invest. Now, they've done a lot of analysis of Tesla, and they've released many reports, but essentially their 2025 price target for the company is around $3,000. Now, the reason why I'm only using this for the base case is because that price target is for the year 2025, which is actually 5 years before the projected retirement date in this little scenario that we're running here. So that's actually significantly less bullish if we assume that that $3,000 per share price target would only happen by 2030, 5 years later than ARK Invest expects it to. But if we go with these assumptions, that means that Tesla's market cap in 2030 would be around $3.5 trillion, and that price per share would be about $3,000. And if that was the scenario that came to pass, you would only need approximately 370 shares to retire. And at today's prices, that would cost around $340,000. Let's move now to the bull case valuation model. And for this model, I'm actually using Chicken Genius Singapore's YouTube video where he talks about how to retire on Tesla stock. Now, he's a YouTuber with almost 300,000 subscribers, and he's a very bullish Tesla investor. I feel like almost half of the videos on his channel are about Tesla. Now, according to him, his price target for 2030, which he says is a conservative price target, is $6,900. Now, there's more that goes into this, but I don't have enough time in this video to break it down, so let's just use that figure, $6,900. Going back to the spreadsheet then, that would mean that Tesla's market cap by 2030 would be around $8 trillion. And if the price per share was actually $6,900, then you would only need 160 shares in order to retire. And at today's prices, that would cost you slightly less than $150,000. But what about the super bull scenario? Not Super Bowl, super bull. This valuation model is coming from a private investor named Frank Peelin. He's got a blog where he breaks down the numbers, and according to him, by 2030, Tesla could be worth just under $13,000 per share. Now, obviously, that's an incredibly bullish prediction, and I'll leave it to you whether or not you think those are credible numbers. There's links down here, and you can crunch the numbers yourself if you want. But if this scenario actually came to pass, that would mean that by 2030, Tesla's market cap would be $15 trillion, and with that $12,800 per share price tag, you would only need 86 Tesla shares to retire. And at today's prices, that would cost you just under $80,000. So those are the 4 scenarios based on 4 different valuation models for what Tesla could be worth in 2030. And the number of shares you'd need to retire ranges from 760 at the high end to potentially as low as 86. But there's a few more important things to mention. First of all, you can see that I haven't incorporated capital gains into this model here. And the reason for that is A, you could be investing in these Tesla shares through a tax-free account, a Roth IRA in the US or a TFSA in Canada, but also there's different jurisdictions with different tax rates all around the world, and so I'm not able to accurately reflect what the tax rates might be. But if you think that you will have to pay capital gains tax on these investments, then you can download a copy of this spreadsheet and add that in and see if the numbers change for your own personal circumstances. Secondly, I think it's important to mention here that this is just a thought experiment. I'm just trying to see, in theory, how many Tesla shares would it take to retire by 2030. But of course, diversification is very important, especially in retirement, and I'm certainly not advocating for anybody to put all their retirement eggs into a single basket, especially not one single equity in a company like Tesla. And finally, of course, there is a chance that all of this could go to zero. Maybe the stock market is a giant Ponzi scheme, you never know. I don't personally think that's likely to happen, but I'm just a guy on the internet, and so you should always make sure to do your own due diligence and to make your own research before making investment decisions. This is more of just a starting off point for people that are interested in investing in Tesla and for people that are interested in retiring early. And if you've watched some of the other videos on my channel, you might have seen that I've made similar retirement calculations for the SPY ETF, for Palantir, and for Ethereum. Essentially, I'm just trying to find how many shares of blank would it take to retire, because of course we're all on a mission to retire early and to enjoy our lives and to have the freedom to be able to do what we want. So if you enjoyed this video, you might also like this one or this one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later.